Untitled Chapter. Welcome everyone. Thanks for coming along. It's great to see such a diverse crowd. I actually thought I'd know everyone. I always think that I'm being Mitchell. I know everyone. I don't know anyone really at all. I'm Marie Haley. I've lived here all my life. I have grown up on a farm, very conventional farming methods, spraying gorse on the weekends, pulling the hoses for my dad, and taken over that farm, not really farm, just one of the blocks this year, and personally looking at how we can do it a little bit differently. Actually, because we don't have the time that my dad invested into farming. I'm trying to look at ways of doing it that's a bit easier for us. So maybe we're a bit lazier than the last generation, but I'm certainly looking at ways of cutting down the hard work. But I'm going to be introducing today. The layout's basically half an hour for each speaker, and then we'll just have a short break in between so you can go to the loo or get another beer or whatever. Questions and answers at the end. I'm sure they probably wouldn't mind if you have a pressing question halfway through. I think they're always quite good, those questions that just pop up, but at the end we'll have a sort of half an hour Q&A. Looking to finish about 3:30. I'm a storyteller, so I just have to. I can't help myself when I've got an audience to make the most of it, because I'm not actually a presenter today. But I want to tell you a story that I think everyone on Banks Peninsula should know, and that's about Rakeihatsu. Rakeihatsu was really one of the first explorers to come to New Zealand, and we don't really know where from. He's Polynesian. He came to Nelson and travelled down over the Alps with his digging stick, his code, and marked out all of those great lakes and named them in his travels. And he came back to Banks Peninsula, travelling up the east coast, met his son here who'd come down the east coast past Kaikoura. And he dug out Lake Ellesmere, Wairewa, Lake Forsyth, and he thrust his digging stick into the head of the harbour, Mount Bosu as we know it today, Tuharaki. I was hoping you could see it from here, but you can't quite, it's just behind the hill. So his stick sticks up out of the heads of the hills at the end of Banks Peninsula there, his digging stick. And you might think, why the hell is she telling me this story? But the reason he thrust it into this landscape was because he marked this place as Te Pātaka o Rakeihatsu, the food basket of Rakeihatsu. This was the most abundant place in the South Island in his travels. He chose to settle here because it had the most food, the biggest forest, the most abundant sea life. And I could go on and on about what he would have found when he came here. 2 species of moa. He was a moa hunter. Kiwi, giant forests with millions of seabirds coming in at night, diving down through the canopy of that old growth forest, going down to the forest floor and burrowing in under the tree roots, bringing in the marine nutrients, just as the salmon do in North America, and fertilising that forest. Because this was an island ecosystem for many millions of years. And that's an important story because that's what we farm. We farm millions of years of seabirds coming in and fertilising this place. The volcanic soil, the beautiful warm microclimate that we have here. We really are already farming such a rich environment, and we should look back to that past to be grateful for what we've really got. And that helps us look forward into the future and what we can do with our land to make it healthier going forward. So sorry, I'm done. I'm going to introduce Cornelia now. She's got a vast amount of knowledge, a real passion for microbiome, I would say, for understanding the soil, food, and the gut, and how those things are linked together. The soil you grow your food in, and how that fertilises you. So Cornelia was born in Germany and lives in Pigeon Bay now with her husband Kai and her 2 children, and has koro kai and I'm sure most of you already know about Cornelia. So she was born in Germany. There learned a lot about the land and farming, especially with animals from her grandparents, and brought that love out to New Zealand. Had a background in school education, and then did an apprenticeship at Photofarm and a certificate in organic horticulture as well. And so just pulling those three things together, and we're lucky, to have Cornelia here teaching us about how to grow on Bex Nature. So I'm really looking forward to hearing what you've got to say.
Thank you, Marie. Hey, welcome everybody. It's amazing to see so many people turn up today. And yeah, get right into it. This is just a quote. Some of you at the back, you might not be able to read it. I'll just read it out to you. The sun each second transforms 4 million tons of itself into light. And for millions of years, humans, animals on this planet have been feasting on that sunlight. As the sun dies, we have plants growing, we have photosynthesis happening, and yeah, we have life. This is just to evoke a little bit of an awe, of an understanding, just that there's so many things that we don't know, that we can't explain, that we can't see, and science is just trying to catch up on these, but they're still not there. Nature's totally mind-blowing, and we just need to start to trust in it, and maybe easing off on our modulations, and trusting nature to do its thing. For 4 billion years ago, bacteria and fungi started to colonize the planet. Before we had a very, very hot planet, it was all volcanic, it was all happening there. And then when it settled, when it cooled down, bacteria and fungi were the first ones to come in. A billion years after that, protozoa, nematodes, and all these predatory organisms started to come, and they were eating those bacteria and fungi and started to release nutrients. Bacteria and fungi, they can access nutrients, they can dissolve rock and take nutrients out from rock. But when we just have bacteria and fungi, we have a very congested system. We need those nutrient cycles to release them, and that's when the predators come along to eat them, and they poop out plant-available nutrients. So when plants came along, 2 billion years after that, they tapped into a system that was already fully functioning. Nutrients were cycled, so they didn't need to get enzymes going to dissolve the rock and extract nutrients. That system was already in place, so they tapped into that when they evolved. And then there started a mutual relationship happening as the plants started to photosynthesize, to use the sunlight to make carbon chains and pump that into the soil to feed bacteria and fungi. Bacteria and fungi mine the subsoil, mine the parent material to give nutrients to the plants. This is how nature works. So a mutual benefit we have, the plants and the microbiology in the soil. That's where we want to go back to. Because it's for free, isn't it? I don't need to apply nutrients when it's already there, and they can mine it out of the rocks, the clays, the sand, and the silt particles. And that's where we want to go. So the plant, as it grows, it has the microbiome in the root zone. It makes very simple sugars, and because it uses the carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. So it takes 3 carbon dioxide molecules and it takes water molecules.
That's not very good.
Right? And with that,
It's like team what you did.
and with this, you can't see it from there. Really? there from here. Looks good.
Penis divide.
Anyway, they take these components and make a carbon chain. They get the carbon dioxide through the leaves and the water through the roots, and they make a carbon chain. And that carbon chain they use for themselves to grow, and part of that goes into the roots as exudates. So that's how we sequester carbon in the soil. They push them through the roots out to the soil food web, and those bacteria and fungi, they come in and respond and feast on that. We've got the same system going. Our digestive system is what the plant has here. We are at least 2 kilos of our being, if we scratch all the bacteria off. We have a 2 kilo block of viruses, bacteria, fungi that make who we are. If we would not have that, we couldn't function. They do so many functions in our body with hormone regulations. There's a connection to the brain happening, pathways, and 70% of our immune system is in our gut. Bacteria are doing their job. We want a massive diversity in our gut to do the right thing, to digest our food, and the plant wants a massive diversity in the soil to do that digestion for them. Is there a question about that? Is that pretty clear? So we want to bring back the biology to do this for us. When we have a fully functioning soil food web happening, we have the nutrients that are getting cycled out of the organic matter and out of the parent material where we are farming it. The roots can go way more deeper when we have dysfunctioning because they loosen up the soil. They break the compaction layers. They can flocculate clays and make nutrients available. When the soil gets loosened up, we then also have the roots going deeper. They can access water from deeper areas, and so this is where we started. We started farming 7 years ago on our lifestyle block. This is how that looked like. Really nice clay. I love it. I love it. It holds onto nutrients, holds onto water, but it's tricky to start with because it needs to be flocculated. We transformed that.
Excuse me, please. Sorry, what does it mean?
Flocculation. When we have clay is a very, very small particle. So if we have, this is a sand, this is a silt, and this is a clay. They're very, very small. So when they're packed together really, really tight, and they make they're packed really, really tight together. And to flocculate it is we get them in different shapes and forms and breaking that clay pan up. That means flocculation. A lot of people do it with just adding lime or gypsum to flocculate clay. Soil Food Web does an excellent job in doing that. This is our soil now. It's rich, it's dark. We get 2 spades deep. Oh, there's a 2 spades deep of this material. So since we have this, we totally stop digging because the fungi, they don't like digging. This is some fungal strands growing on a piece of wood chips. So we use them as mulch in our garden. I hope we don't make a big mess here. So you see them. You see those white strands? I'll pass it around in a minute. When you see those strands like that and they hold on to material, I'm 100% sure that this is a beneficial fungi. They will do a really good job in the soil. I just passed these around. Have a dig in, your duty. So by doing gardening like that, getting your hands dirty, you're inoculating your body with good bacteria. If you garden, with the massive use of hand sanitizers, you have dry hands, just go in and dig in some really healthy soil and sort it out. When we eat vegetables that are grown in a complete soil, fruit web soil like the black one there, or really dark chocolate coloured one, we pick up those organisms, we eat them, and they replenish our soil, our microbiome, not our soil. They replenish our microbiome in our gut. So for 99.99%, we as humans have been eating food from the land with the bacteria that we've been ingesting. So our relationship, our bacteria in the gut and the soil is very, very close.
Does that bacteria survive cooking, or is that only eating?
Eating it raw. Yeah, minimal washing, eating it raw. Just when we, like, a lot of the times you'd cook your food, but you've got a salad that you cannot wash you don't wash the ingredients to that. You ingest a lot of bacteria that's on the leaf surfaces. There's some research done by the Department of Soil Microbiology and Symbiotic Systems in Spain, and there's a plant getting attacked by botrytis. When the plant gets attacked by botrytis, it sends a signal to the soil food web that it's getting attacked. When there's trichoderma in the soil, it will respond to that plant. If there's no trichoderma in the soil, there will be no response, no signal coming from the soil. But if there is trichoderma in the soil, it responds with chemical molecules. And then the plant can prime hormones in the response from the trichoderma in the soil. The plant can't do it alone. It can't fend off the botrytis all alone. With the soil food web, then all of a sudden it can. So they've done that. They've done different researches with different plants. Like this one was the control group, and this one was the with the trichoderma in the soil. It's harder to see on the screen here. It's nice and sharp on my screen. Can you describe that? You just see the attack on the leaves, the yellowing, the browning off of the leaves here, and the plant really struggling and dying. And this is nice and green. So the plant could prime hormones in response to that attack. It can't do it alone. Yeah, it just needs that relationship. When we have the biology on the root system, we get a rhizos sheet. This is coating the roots. When we have a coating like this, then it's really hard for detrimental organisms to attack the root, like a root-feeding nematode or any other diseases to get to it, because they will outpopulate the bad guys. We need a certain number in the soil to get this system going. If we just have a very small amount of bacteria in it and not many fungi, we do not get quorum sensing. Quorum sensing means that there is enough number there and there's enough signals going on there that they have a quorum. Like if we're voting, who's voting? Everybody, I hope? We just voted 2 hours ago in Nakarawa. So when we vote and we have a quorum, we have, magic happens, is what Chandra usually says. Stealing that today. But it really is, once you get to that threshold and you have enough bacteria and fungi in the soil, you have those predators working, they can just communicate together and they are like one being. They are not individual bacteria and fungi, they're one thing, and they can change the environment. Strength in numbers. They even change the behavior, and they can adapt to the environment a lot better if they have that quorum. It's the same in a beehive. They also do quorum sensing there. Bacteria have glues that they put around their bodies. They're alkaline glues. So when we have just bacteria in the soil, our pH is usually alkaline. And with those glues, they bind particles together in the soil. And then we have microaggregates. And then we get fungi to connect those microaggregates and bind those together. And then we get macroaggregates. And with this, we get pore spaces. There was a talk from Gabe Brown that I listened to last week. And he said he's got a research on his farm at the moment. And they've found out that his pore spaces are 70%. Now he's throwing out the textbooks because it says 25% pore spaces. But they've discovered that on his farm he gets 70%. With these pore spaces, we've got a lot more water holding capacity. We've got roots that can go a lot deeper, and so on. And then we have earthworms. We have other critters tunneling through the soil to loosen it further up. We've got the roots being able to go deeper. We can hold more water, as I said. When we till soil, we usually fluff it up at the top, and then right underneath we get a compaction layer. So when they started tilling, they've discovered that they get that compaction layer right underneath. So they develop tillers that can go deeper and rip up that compaction layer again. But then underneath they get another compaction layer, just deeper down. And we're just really throwing out the textbooks when we say that roots can go really, really, really deep when we work with the soil food web. Because before they just couldn't. They hit the compaction layer and then they go sideways. When we have heavy rain, it also goes onto the compaction layer. If we're on a slope, we get landslides. So breaking up these compaction layers is really important. This is just briefly about diversity, because sometimes we think if we have too much diversity, there's other plants that struggle and they can't survive. But usually we'll see plants that have very different root shapes. They are wider, they go deeper, more shallow. And so we can work with the diversity. They will access different areas in the soil to take up nutrients. And with the diversity above ground, we also get diversity below ground. Because every plant will feed a different set of microorganisms in the root zone and connect to the soil food web. So they are not competing, they're just symbiotic together. When animals graze on such a diverse crop, they can find the nutrients that they need, because each plant will have different nutrient profile, and they can also access medicine that they need, because they will pick whatever they need, and they will self-medicate. They're super clever. Out at the back I've got a little stack of books. The one on nourishment is really, really good. Just tells you how little we know, how our animals can feed themselves, they can medicate, and they know exactly what to eat if we let them. When we have bare soil, we get carbon dioxide and water going up into the atmosphere. When we first till it, we get a massive amount of bacteria happening, because they then break down organic matter, and we get a massive bloom of bacteria. So we see they use up lots of that carbon dioxide that was first stored in the soil, and they use it up and it goes back up in the air. Same with water. When we have a permanent cover on, we can pump the carbon dioxide into the root system, and it is held in there by fungi. Also the water retention. This is from Gabe Brown's book, Dirt to Soil, 5 Keys for Optimal Soil Health. So we limit chemical and mechanical destruction of the soil. Like in our vegetable garden, I see a lot of people here that are from a vegetable garden perspective. So we are easing off on digging. At the start, when we had heavy clay, we did double digging, because I'm not going to destroy a lot of the soil food web in this lot. I would if I would dig this piece here. We don't want bare soil. We try to keep always a cover of dead or alive plant material on the soil. The dead plant material is a food for the soil food web, and the alive plant material as well, because the plants are feeding the soil with their exudates. We try to have a living root in the soil for as long as possible, and have diversity of plants. When we have diversity of plants, we get diversity in the soil, diversity of insects that come and feed, and so forth. And we try to integrate livestock. We don't have our cows for the vegetable garden, or we can use some of the manure in the vegetable garden and some of the chickens too. Yeah, but livestock integration is amazing. We just need those manure from them. So the soil food web, just briefly. Here we've got the plants, and when they drop their leaves in that system, or they drop branches, making a mess, we've got organic matter. So having a mess is actually amazing, because it's food. We don't want things tidy, we want it covered and messy. Then we have bacteria and fungi. They break down the organic matter. Fungi are really good at mining nutrients from the rocks and the silt and the clay and the sand. And then we have nematodes and protozoa that eat them and then release nutrients in plant available form. When these critters are there, we get lots of earthworms. So if we don't have a microscope to test things, we can look at the soil, we can look at the structure. You know, regenerative farmers, they just use a spade, go into your paddocks and dig a hole and have a look how many earthworms you've got, how deep your roots will go down, and just do visual assessments. You can learn a lot by doing that. When we have a teaspoon of healthy soil, it can have 75,000 species of bacteria. This is species. It's 600 million in total. A teaspoon. Like that. 75,000. We need those species because they work at different ranges. They do their functioning at different temperatures, humidity levels. And so we always have something functioning in the soil if we have a massive diversity, because some can work at low temperatures, some work at high temperatures. Very same thing for fungi. It's 1 million total, but we go with biomass with fungi because a fungal strain can be really, really long, and then it's not just one species or one fungi guy. It's we go with the biomass. 10,000 species of protozoa. I was mind-blowing those numbers, isn't it? 200 species of nematodes. Nematodes is usually like, oh, I don't like nematodes. It's just 10% that are the bad ones. 90% are actually really good in the soil. Some microarthropods and earthworms. I just want to briefly go through this chart here. It says it's a succession. So when we start with, on this area here, that's the bare rock. That's when, you know, when something got disturbed after volcanic eruption. We are right here. The first things that start happening is bacteria. They will start colonizing that, and then we have weeds and mosses going in at those first areas. Nature wants to always get to this. Nature wants a forest. So we work towards it to get to that forest. When we are in the row crops and pasture, we have one-to-one fungal and bacterial biomass. In our systems that we usually look at, we have the bacteria, they are fine with disruptions that we are doing to it, but we have lost the fungi. So we want to get those fungi back to have less weeds, because they like the bacterial dominance. So if we see lots of weeds, it shows us we are too bacterial, and we want to increase our fungi. When we have got a nice pasture and we till it, we go back in succession. It's really good for that first crop of brassica. It does really well because brassicas, they can deal with a good bacterial population, at least fungi. They don't work with mycorrhizal fungi, so that first crop is usually really good. And then afterwards, if we till again, we keep on going backwards further and we get to the weed stage. Yeah, light bulb moment. We heard a bit of, yeah. So, yeah, we are disrupting it. Now we're pushing it this way, or we're pushing it the other way. We try to push it this way by adding wood chip mulch, by adding lots of fungal foods. We make compost that we try to push for fungi, and we add lots of carbon and these brown materials to it to get to that area here. Because we do see, it needs more fungi. A lot of these systems, we just need to push for fungi. Bacteria are usually okay. This is where we started 7 years ago. And this is what we had a couple of years later. So we want to grow abundance. We grow all our food. We grow 90% of our food. We grow all of our vegetables. We grow fruit for 6 months of the year. And yeah, pretty much what we're buying is some rice and some grain to make our bread. But with this, we can feed our microbiome. We have all our nutrients that we need to function properly, and we can be healthy. Here we are making a compost extract. So with making compost, with making vermicast, we're putting it in a big bucket anyway. We mix it, and we get those organisms from the material, from the compost, from the vermicast into that water, and then we filter it. I check it with and at this stage I check it with a microscope to see what organisms I have in it. If I have enough bacteria, enough fungi, we usually need more fungi, and then it's filtered, putting into the sprayer, and then it goes out in the field. So that's our sprayer setup. The battery on the front goes to the pump, and when Kai hits the trigger, it sprays. So it's just a really fine mist. How long is the hose, guys? 25? Yeah, I think 25 meters. Then we can get a good coverage, and then we just shift that little part. It works on a small scale really well. So we're trenching our paddock, ideally in spring and in autumn. And then a few weeks later, I test, see if they've taken hold, and I test it with a microscope. What we have found when we started off with was high in bacteria, low in fungi, and there was no protozoa, there was no nematodes to do nutrient cycling. So that's why we saw, the stuff was just not growing really well. And it's totally changed. No, the kids can do stuff totally fine. That's their microbiome. Nothing wrong with that. So this is where we started off with, and this is what we got after. Because of that, we've had our first harvest of honey in that year, because we had heaps of clover in the paddock. It was just a massive amount of food. We've got areas like this, where our animals don't go. I'll just go very, very briefly in that, just another couple of techniques that we've used for grazing on our block. These are areas where the animals would never ever go. They're not getting trampled, they're not pooing on it, they're not peeing on it, they're just totally avoiding it. Whenever we had them in our big paddock, they would just not go for that. So we want to mimic nature. It's called Biomimicry, from a talk from Ray Archuleta. Starts with the soil. So we have them all spread out, but that red area here, they have never been in the last 5 years. They always go to their favourite spots. When they're in the paddock, they go there 5 times, 10 times, and they will just continue to hammer those nice spots. And they would not go to any other areas. So these areas, they don't get any nutrients as well. They don't get any shit. So we're mopping them up more and more and more until we get to a stage that works. I don't do it this hard because I can't shift them at 10, 12, 2 and 4. I can do it every 24 hours. This is what we can manage. But there's some guys further down south that do those shifts. So now we got a movable trough, we got temporary fencing, and they are mopped up. So we've got cow together, it's our dairy cow and the calf. They're saying hi to the newest member of the family. It's just always, you've got cows, you've got sheep together. You just have to make those decisions yourself if that works. If they're used to it, they will respect each other. If they're not used to it and you put them together, it might end up in a bit of a clash. But they can get used to it. We've also got a fence line where we planted trees. Normally we'd need a double fence line to protect that. Now we just put the temporary fencing on it. And when I look at the cow pads, once they've moved out of the paddock, this is what we see, loads of worms, and it's looking better and better. We're not there yet, but we are slowly working towards it. For me, what I just want you to take away from my part is we know so little about the soil, very, very little, and I want you to trust in nature again to do things for you. And just giving things a go and observe, take notes and learn from others. Sam, I'm over to you.
So I just want to introduce Sam Lang from Quorum Sensing. And Sam was born in the North Island. It was involved a bit in some bureaucratic processes up there that didn't work well. and realised, I think, that the community is really important. The community decision making is really important, and went back to farming at that stage, and then became part of the Kellogg leadership process, and then went on as a Newfield scholarship overseas, so visiting 18 different countries and 100 different farmers all around the world. And the thing I really loved about what you said there is that it was support from the community that led to the greatest chance of success. And I think we really know about that on Banks Peninsula community and how important it is. We've all lived through a few things lately where we know how important our neighbours are. And you know, it goes beyond that in many ways. And I'm really very interested in how we can build this as a community, how we can share our knowledge on Banks Peninsula, because another thing I've picked up as well is, you know, how important and how different each ecology and each environment is. That what you have learned somewhere else is not necessarily applicable directly onto your landscape. So I think here on Banks Peninsula we have a lot to learn that's unique here, and so really love hearing that coming through with Sam's work. And a wee quote that your farm is a mirror of yourself, and when you change your farm, you change your reflection. And that really, I read that this morning and it really sort of hit me, and I was thinking about it all day. So Sam said he saw the limits of the old systems, and just really interested in that holistic process. Regenerative agriculture is holistic but needs to acknowledge awareness and creativity with bottom-up drive from community and sharing of what works in each unique environment. So I'm really looking forward to hearing what Sam has to say. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Marie, and thanks for inviting us here and turning up. Just to echo just on the context kind of thing with Cornelia's compost sprayer there. Once you start looking around the world and around the country and stuff, people are basically, you know, context is everything, and what Cornelia's doing with a small little electric sprayer on the back, some farms are doing on hundreds of thousands of hectares with liquid injection systems down with their drills, or they're putting it with their fertilizer, or what was the other one I had? Basically feeding fungi to animals, not for the animals' benefit, but because what comes out the back end and where they can put it, where it's harder for us to get to. So, you know, taking these concepts and always thinking, well, there's a reason that someone's doing something. So it's like, well, what is the reason that they're doing it, and is that relevant to my context? And if how they're doing it doesn't feel relevant to me, how can I get creative about taking that same kind of thinking and applying it in a creative way? I think that's a huge amount of what kind of a growing number of farmers are starting to play with. And it's not a completely new phenomenon in the history of farming, I wouldn't think, but just with this kind of thinking, that's I think part of the excitement is that discovery process and that innovation process, which can generally be quite fun. But my name's Sam Ming, so I manage a farming network called Quorum Sensing, which some of you may have heard, some of you may have heard of, some may not. It kicked off in 2018. John O'Hare was one of the founders with a couple of other farmers just outside of Leeston. They're all part of the Ellesmere Sustainable Ag Catchment Group, and probably some of them a couple of them had known each other for a number of years, but hadn't realised that they kind of had these little side hobbies that were to do with sort of biology and soils and diversity and things like that. And it wasn't until a couple of conversations sparked off that they realised they had similar interests. And so I thought, well, let's get together. They threw it out to the rest of the catchment group and said, you know, would anyone like to come and, just have a bit of a yarn, come to a field day, start bouncing ideas and that. And I think it was like 20 people or something turned up, and they went, holy shit, we didn't realise there were that many people as weird as us in our community. And so, I suppose all of a sudden it wasn't so weird. It's a critical mass thing going on there. So that group took off just as a voluntary farm discussion group with locals, and then quickly expanded through a whole lot of existing networks and new networks to others, partly through on-farm discussion day groups and partly just through a WhatsApp chat, which has now got about 120 farmers on it. Kind of keep a limit on it because you can't get it too big. because you kind of lose the trust networks between it. But so what took off as a voluntary network towards the end of last year, there was an opportunity to sort of like, well, how do we take this group bigger? Because there was a lot of demand coming from farmers around the country for the similar kind of support. And so we set the group up as a charitable trust and applied for some extension funding basically from MPI, which we got in July this year. So my job's effectively managing that network and supporting farmers just kind of to the best that we can really. So we've gone from just me and the board to a team of 4 now, which is exciting, and really just getting going. But that's kind of my main role these days. I also do a little bit of independent research on the side, again kind of related to the regenerative farming stuff. And I used to be a hill country farmer in Hawke's Bay until I chased a girl to Christchurch a couple of years ago, and I've convinced her to go farming, so we're just trying to negotiate a lease at the moment in the Canterbury foothills, so hoping to get back on the land fairly soon. Other things I'll say is I'm not here as an advocate of anything, and I don't really approach things that way. It's purely if there's we kind of have a work with the willing theory, I suppose. So if people are coming to learn, then we're here, and our job is to support them the best they can. You're never going to find me or anyone else going out there and pushing a message or advocating something onto an unwilling audience. That's not really our style. So I'm assuming you're all here to come and listen to me, so you've stuck with me for the next 20 minutes. But, and really, from my perspective, this is just me sharing my experiences and ideas that I've picked up along the way. Quorum Sense, again, it's not an advocacy body, it doesn't have positions on anything, so nothing that you'll hear is a Quorum Sense position. We're simply a support network that helps facilitate farm-to-farm sharing. And in this situation today, I'm partly here to introduce you to Quorum Sense and partly just to share my own personal experiences and understandings and the hope that that's going to be useful. So yeah, I was grew up in Lower Hutt as a city boy down there, but mum was a Hawke's Bay Hill Country farm girl, so I spent a lot of time up there as a kid. And yeah, post-uni had a brief stint in the bureaucracy, which was pretty horrific, so I got out of there pretty quick. I think it lasted 18 months, and went shepherding on my family farm with my uncle, which is the one down the bottom here, so just a fairly standard lamb and bull beef finishing block. Did that for a bit over a year. Was lucky enough to get into to get a Nuffield scholarship to travel around the world for 9 months, and when I got back from that I wanted to do something a little bit different, and I ended up on another hill country farm up in about north of Mycorrhiza in Hawke's Bay. That was sort of playing around with the same kind of thinking that I got curious about. And what got me curious, I guess, when I went shepherding at Hawke's Bay, I kind of, the brain keeps whirring, and actually when you're out shifting stock every day, you have a lot of time to think. And my brain, because I wasn't having to manage the farm, so to speak, was all about what's the future of this landscape. Where's hill country farming going? Got a real love for the landscape and the people. And with my kind of geography hat on, I guess I was like, well, there's a whole lot of things coming down the line, and I don't have to list them because we all know them, that are putting pressure on how we currently farm and what we currently do. So my thinking was, well, what's next? Where are we going? What's this kind of system shift that everyone's talking about? And how do we do that in a really positive way, as opposed to the 1980s shock crisis, pull the rug out from everyone and the strong survive and the weak or the unfortunate don't go so well. How do we do that positively? So that was kind of, Nuffield's great in the sense that they give you a whole lot of money and they just say, just go and learn something. And really, there's not a huge amount of accountability, which is nice. So I guess they try and pick people that are accountable to themselves. And so what I was really interested in was not regenerative farming or anything about farming systems. I was interested in how do we, as communities, do a good job of supporting ourselves and each other to kind of make positive system shifts. What's coming down the line? What is the kind of social process behind that? And so I got around 18 countries over 9 months and visited over 100 farmers myself, let alone the one who visited in groups. And when you start asking the same questions to the same people, you pick up patterns. And there were some really distinctive patterns that I picked up along the way about what it takes for a community or a farmer to kind of go through that process successfully. Some of the farms, you can't really see them here, but I put all these pictures up just to illustrate that this is not just a kind of, if you use regenerative farming as a label, it's not just a United States idea. I picked up the same language, the same principles, in some cases the same practices across 4 different continents and 18 countries. Some have been around a really long time and some are really new. But it's the thinking that sits behind it that was really consistent. And some of these concepts, like in Scotland, the UK, Uruguay, are not that dissimilar from many parts of New Zealand. And yeah, what I picked up was, well, I suppose my pathway went, okay, there's some really interesting stuff about people here, which is that when farmers or farming communities have successfully made significant changes, there was always a support network in place. And if that was an individual farmer, it didn't actually have to be other farmers. It could just be their family or their, the band that they play with in town who really believed in what they were trying to do, even though their neighbours thought they were nuts. Or it could have been their family, or it could have been another bunch of farmers. And ideally, that's the best case because you can share and learn together. But whatever the situation, there was always a strong support network that the farmer would talk about as being really important to get them through that kind of uncertainty, change, risk phase. Because a lot of the farmers that I was visiting kind of did this without much support. There were, and so I guess the kind of around the world, different language, different labels, but common principles and kind of thinking that underpin this, which is kind of effectively what Cornelia was introducing this morning. Also that these kind of, when farmers successfully combine these practices into systems that work, that are founded on this kind of ecological function, biological function of their farms, saw some extremely successful, profitable, healthy farms, again, all over the world, and that's really what, it wasn't until I got to that point, because I didn't know anything about this, I learned a lot along the way, I got to that point, and once I'd seen enough examples of that, I got really curious about not just the social process, but actually how we were farming, and that's really what and the best outcomes achieved when you get farmers and rural practitioners and communities actually working together. Anytime there was any kind of top-down push to move in this way, you tend to get a whole lot of unintended consequences drop out the bottom, and we're all familiar with those. Whereas the success examples were actually those communities of farmers that took a very pragmatic approach and drove that themselves, and then often, the regulators might come in after and just basically kind of legislate for what that group had done, and everyone else had to go and catch up. But at least it was workable then because it had been developed by farmers. Quorum sets I've already described there, even though this is a photo of our board. Probably one of the questions I get probably 3 or 4 times a week is, what's the definition of regenerative ag? And you see it asked in the media, and everyone, especially the scientists, get all barred up because there's no definition for something. If there's no definition, then where do you start, right? And there's kind of again, we kind of avoid defining it, and there's reasons for that because of this kind of, it's a broader context specific, but I kind of make 2 distinctions which hopefully might be useful. One of them is this concept of a regenerative farm system. So a regenerative farm system to me is, it's all about the outcomes you're achieving. So you're looking at, I think by nature you're kind of looking at the whole, so you're looking at the environmental, the social, the animal, the human, the economic. You're trying to look at everything that's going on and saying, from an outcomes perspective across all of those, are we moving in a positive direction across all of them? Are any of them significantly compromised? If they're all moved, doesn't matter where you're starting, if you're moving forward across all of those things, then by my definition, you could call that a regenerative system, just by basic. And we're not talking about, it's not like there's this line in the sand where it's like you're regenerative and you're degenerative, which, people getting all annoyed about the implications, or like, and some people are implying that if you're not doing this, then you're bad, which I have a massive issue with. We just think about this as a massive continuum of practice. People are starting at different points. Some people are really strong at these things, but not so strong at these, and that's where they've got to work on, And that's, so trying to take the judgment and scrutiny out of it and just think about it, what is the positive process that we're trying to achieve here, and just think about outcomes and not. So in this context, and I think from a societal perspective or from a government perspective, it shouldn't care how we actually get to that positive outcome. We shouldn't care how we're moving forward. If we're moving forward without compromise, then that's where we go. And so that's kind of my regenerative farm system definition, and scientists really don't like it because it's really complex. You're trying to deal with lots of variables. It's a challenge for science, but it's catching up. The other part of regenerative agriculture is more what you might call a paradigm, or the mindset, or something that's kind of less tangible. But I think actually this is really where the energy is coming from in the community, because this is what gets people excited. This is kind of like the awe and the wonder of the soil ecology and all these crazy things that we actually don't know. It was only a few years ago we didn't realise that plants actually had their own microbiome. We just thought there were microbes on the outside of plants. Now we know that there are actually microbes inside plants, and plants, when they're growing, they'll go and hunt for microbes and they'll absorb them through their root system and then basically embed them in their own, just like we do with our gut. But we didn't realise that plants had their own gut microbiome until a few years ago. And, we're just touching the surface. I think it's like 3% of soil ecology that we technically know from a scientific perspective. Who knows what the other 97%'s doing? And that's kind of, that's kind of where the excitement and the wonder and the exploration come from. And so regenerative agriculture as a paradigm is kind of this like set of principles. It's a way of thinking about things, thinking about continuous improvement, being outcome oriented, but also being really clear that context is really important. So what you do on, what Cornelia does on their block is going to be, like the tools that she uses and the practices that she uses is going to be very different to someone on 5,000 hectares of, steep high country where you can't even get a quad across it. So, hopefully that's kind of useful. This is pretty, can't see my pretty drawing, but this is my kind of hand-drawn concept of effectively what Cornelia was talking about. And, the only point to think of this is you've got here on my right, you've got a simple above ground plant community, simple below ground plant community. As above, so below. They kind of mirror each other. It's like if we have a really, really simple diet of bread and butter, our gut microbiome is going to be really simple. If we have a really diverse diet full of lots of different things, we're going to have a really diverse gut. Kind of works the same. And this is kind of where we're trying to head to, which is, more diversity, although it was an ecologist that actually drew this, not me, so I put more grass in there as a grass farmer. Probably less flowers, but they're all important, it's just the ratios. But you can see that the point here is that once you get that biological function going, your root mass is increasing, your rooting depth, the diversity and the abundance of what's happening below ground, and this is what's doing. Effectively what we're working on here is, you've got a small nutrient cycling pool over here and you've got a really big one here. That's what we're trying to do. Cycle more nutrients, capture more solar energy and transfer that solar energy through the plant down into the soil, which is the energy source for the microbes. So it's repeating a bit of what Cornelia said. And in terms of, this is kind of a continuum. Every farm, regardless of how it's managed, is going to have elements of biological nutrient cycling versus the, managing the chemical pools. You could really crudely say there's two ways to grow grass. One is you just basically hydroponics, and the other one is full biological with no nutrient input whatsoever. And often we're at different parts of that kind of spectrum. I hear all the time farmers that haven't put fertiliser on for 10, 15, 20 years or whatever, and they're still going to grow grass because their grazing management is just super intensive, and so they don't get nutrient transfer. And they might be mining their soils a little bit in terms of totals with the stock that are leaving, but the amount that they're mining relative to what's in their soil is so minor that they can probably go and do that for another 50 years before their soil will start tapping out. Saying that, they go plant a few trees and the seabirds come and do all the, and start bringing all their waste in from the ocean back to there, and maybe they don't need to. And that's basically how, the peninsula probably used to, that's how the peninsula used to get its fertility, right? Seabirds, pretty much the whole country. And I've heard that even lots of our native forests are suffering from phosphate deficiencies because of overfished and we haven't got enough seabirds. So, I'm rambling now. Ultimately, as a farmer, this is what we want to do: is we want to harvest more grass. So the whole goal of this process is managing this process to the point where we can harvest more grass through these things, be more resilient, make more money, etc., etc. This is what's possible. Again, this is kind of just a photo on a 2,500 hectare farm of effectively what Cornelia's done in her garden. This farmer was doing at a large scale. So these are soils, I dug these, they're about 10 metres either side of the fence line on a boundary. Admittedly, this one is the furthest corner of that particular farmer's farm, so it gets highly undergrazed, so it was kind of tall and steady and that kind of stuff, but it's kind of the baseline, whereas this is, but this, we had 20-25 mils of rain the night before we went out and took this. I couldn't find moisture in the soil on the right here, but in this one it had infiltrated over 100 mils and that kind of stuff. So basically, this soil was capped. There was no nutrient cycling, there's no function going on there. All that rain that fell wasn't actually being utilised. But I mean, this is just to say that this is a key indicator of what's possible. This is the farm. Sorry, the can't really see, but this was the closest case study I could find to the peninsula out of my kind of repertoire of case studies, so I thought it might be more relevant. Effectively showing they've got some low country and then they've got some big high country. I'm not going to say whose place it is because I didn't explicitly ask their permission. If the video quality was better, you'd see that these carryover cows are extremely shiny and healthy. And this is one of the trials that they did. So this particular farm had been, conventional program superphosphate for decades, and what they were finding is that the superphosphate wasn't growing any more grass, and so they're spending a lot of money for no return. His father and the son was starting to take over, and the father was just going to go and do a 10% trial with something different that he'd been researching. The son said, bugger that, the superphosphate's not working, so just do the whole farm. Anyway, they flew on basically a biostimulant of sorts with some trace elements in this particular case. So they're just changing their fertiliser, and I'm not saying that that's what everyone should do, but this is just an example. And what happened was, not the first year, but 2 years later, all of a sudden, this was the side that was treated and this was the side that wasn't. The black line's just is the same photo, I've just put a black line there. Clover absolutely exploding, grass growing through the tussock, absolutely taking over. This one, very little grass, no clover, still full of Hyraceae, all undone. There's no fence between these things and they're grazed the same. All they've done is change the fert policy. And effectively what they've done is basically working up that soil biology in the situation. They did that across the whole farm. And I'll tell you what, the lambs coming off that place are just absolute rippers. And this is just one of the kind of indicators that we use for, as your pasture in balance, is the quality of obviously a cow pat, and having that little divot in there. And so in terms of like those real tangible indicators, you go to some dairy farms and that kind of stuff and you can't find the manure because it's all squirting out through the eye of the needle. And then sometimes you get the big cow pats that are mounting up, in late summer because there's no green feed and that kind of stuff. This is one of our key indicators. The other one's the gut fill, the left-hand triangle on the animal. In terms of, just thinking like keeping it real pragmatic. And again, you get that right, that's the outcome. Now this particular farm, they just started off with fertiliser and they kind of fluked it, but some clever research and for whatever reason their environment really responded really well to what they did. Still had a huge amount of opportunity, I thought, when we visited them. They've since got much more into the diversity, so really trying to increase it, because they were still planting mostly ryegrass clover pastures. They were monoculture winter crops, cultivation based, all the same kind of things. Now much more moving to no-till, high diversity, and really, what I was really excited about, really getting into the grazing management side of things. So their grazing management, even on the lower country, was still relatively, might be week long, shifting once a week or something like that. And so you had the undergrazing and the overgrazing and that kind of thing, and a huge amount of untapped potential. But so I'm quite excited to see where they're going to be in a year once they've added these extra tools to their toolbox. So there's quite a lot of criticism of the lack of data in New Zealand on what these kind of systems are doing, and that's kind of true as far from a peer-reviewed scientific perspective. There's not a huge amount of data. Because I get to do what I do, I get to hear stories all the time, and farmers send me their soil tests and they go, well, we haven't put any fert on for the last 3 years now, we've been doing these things, and their availables are going up, not down, or they're staying the same or whatever, or their organic matters are going up 0.5% per year on the top 150 centimetres, and we're just getting this over and over again, and I'm like, how many times do I need to hear this for it to be true for me? And I've been on farms where I've seen the changes and seen the results, so while the data doesn't exist, I'm fairly convinced that is possible. And this is the data coming out of Australia, there's some in the US as well. This is the 10-year comparison of a guy in Aussie with his brother, a guy called Colin Sice. Basically they were running the same kind of system. They both cropped 3 times, and then they were running sheep mostly on the rest of it. The guy on the right, the guy on the side was just extensive set-stocked and conventional cropping, and Colin, who's the innovator, I guess, was doing kind of intensive rotational grazing and what he called pasture cropping, so he wouldn't actually kill anything, he just drilled his wheat into his dormant grasses and just took the crop off and the grass was grown back afterwards, which is quite a neat system. It works in that climate. It doesn't work super easy here from a cash cropping perspective, but I have seen it done. But the interesting thing here is basically soil carbon. You might be able to see the difference between those, which is pretty obvious. One's got heaps of carbon and the other one's got very little. But what we're seeing is, and particularly at not necessarily the top 10 centimetres, but the next foot down, is where we're really seeing the carbon changes in some of these systems. So getting those roots deeper, getting that carbon pump going, and yeah, that kind of soil, I suppose it's basically you're increasing your topsoil, and that's what we're seeing. So you go and dig holes in these places and you can see where the topsoil layer used to be, and you've got all these streaks that are coming down into the next layer of soil, and effectively what they're doing is building soil a layer down. One of our board members is a classic example of this. He's been pretty impressive no-till arable system for 40, 50 years. He knew that he only had 10 centimetres of topsoil back in the 80s or whatever it was now, and now it's got about 400, 450 and that kind of stuff. It was like chocolate cake. It's crazy. That's in an arable system. It's unreal. And so also what they're seeing, and this is what I was speaking to before, is available soil nutrients going up, despite no nutrients going in. And so what's happening there is the biology that is starting to unlock what's actually sitting there tied up in the soil. So and in some cases roots that are dropping down actually starting to bring stuff that's either leached or that's just been sitting in really low subsoils, bringing that to the surface up through the root system, and it's getting cycled at the top, because that's where the plants are and that's where the decomposition's happening. So that's really exciting stuff. Now I just thought to try and be kind of context specific to the peninsula, because I was a little bit scared about coming and talking to you guys, because you've got a pretty unique environment in some cases, and so stock water is obviously a challenge for lots of farms around here. Some of the country is extremely extensive, but you don't necessarily have huge farms. So 1,000 hectare paddock on a 30,000 hectare operation's all good, but 500 hectare paddock on a 2,500 hectare operations are kind of a different story. I don't know how many of them are around, I'm just guessing. So grazing intensity is tricky because of stock water challenges. Also fencing can be challenging. High sheep ratios, which means you can't get jealous as a sheep farmer when all these cattle farmers go out there with these single wires that they can run out like 100 metres in 60 seconds or whatever, and there's their fence. Sheep bring a different challenge, but they've got advantages too. Drought prone, obviously. Out here, aerial food and seeding and stuff's more expensive because you can't put a tractor over everything, although there is still some. And then obviously erosion challenges and just water infiltration were kind of like the kind of particular things about the peninsular context that I thought might be more relevant compared to a nice gentle flat place out in the plains on the other side of the hill there. So I think that the exciting thing here is with what we're doing is it's all about, like, when it comes down to, so I'm hoping that once Jono's finished we can maybe open up a bit more discussion, because I think it's a more appropriate place to start diving into particular things. But yeah, in terms of like the process for, okay, well, does this kind of concept of regenerative agriculture actually offer anything to me? It might not, which is fine. But for me, like in terms of the thought process is, what are your goals? So what are you actually trying to achieve, and how are you tracking, therefore, like goals/challenges? So this is where I am, this is where I'd like to be. Do I know how to get there? I'm not quite sure. What are the factors that are limiting or that are stopping you get there? Have you got particular soil fertility challenges, or is it it might be your genetics in your stock, or it might be markets, or it might be soil, it could be soil structure, soil biology, soil chemistry, plant species. You're not getting the mix. Your roots aren't going deep enough. Whatever these things might be, and then you start going, okay, well, I kind of think about regenerative ag as a kind of an expanded toolbox. So you've got your conventional toolbox and that kind of stuff, and some of those tools are still highly appropriate for what you're trying to do. Some of them you might be trying to move away from for certain reasons. But then kind of what we're kind of, the real fun part for me is this kind of expanded toolbox where you've got all these new tools, and it might be multi-species or different types of ferts to get that soil ecology going, or different grazing management systems to try and go from growing grass one way to growing grass another way, and that kind of stuff. So those are that's kind of the thought process for me. I hope that's useful, because we could dive into practices and that kind of stuff, but it's a big long list and it's going to be different for everyone here. So perhaps that can come a bit more in the discussion. I will just say that in terms of what's really firing up, like what's really getting people going is not just only learning from similar contexts to your own. So if you're a hill country farmer, for example, don't just go and visit hill country farmers for ideas, or even just Banks Peninsula farmers for ideas. A huge amount of what Quorum Sensing offered, I think, is the fact that you've got like every sector in the country, all with different knowledge bases and skills and strengths and ideas and ways of thinking about things coming together. And when you get that cross-pollination, that's when you kind of really, that's when the ideas really start to spark. And it's like the arable farmers in our group have taught the pastoral farmers a huge amount about how they do their cropping and seeding and all these kind of things. And the pastoral farmers have taught the arable farmers a huge amount about the way that they integrate animals into their systems and how they actually manage them. Because you can manage animals really badly, or you can manage animals for bad soil outcomes, or you can manage animals for great soil outcomes. And it's depending on that. So I'm going to leave it there because I want to make sure we've got time for discussion after Jono finishes. Cool. Right.
Thanks, Sam.
Jono.
So I'm just going to introduce Jono just straight away. He's from North Otago and grew up in a spray contracting family. Saw the deteriorating environment around him and impacts, that old farming ways had on family life and life's quality, and started this local discussion group, which has become Quorum Sense. And yeah, I'm really interested to hear what Jono's got to say, coming from that farming background myself, going out and spraying gorse all the time and seeing the impact on the land and on the farm, and the fact that we, on Banks Peninsula, a lot of us have to keep spraying gorse all the time, so really interested in hearing a different perspective. So,
firstly, welcome, thanks for coming along. Can I please see a show of hands here, please, for all the sheep farmers? Yep. What about, I don't imagine we've got any dairy farmers around here, although we sort of do, yeah? Yeah? What about arable? Any arable farmers? Anyone farm gorse?
yeah. Too much of it.
I spent a lot of time, it's actually refreshing to be here not spraying gorse. I used to come here a lot spraying gorse. I used to fly around in a Jet Ranger and an R44, spraying thousands of litres of Tordon all over this gorgeous place that you call home. And that's sobering to say. Yeah. I come here today with the intention of filling in the gaps that Sam and Cornelia possibly missed out, but they were very thorough. And so my challenge today is to keep you guys engaged and learning and not overlay and double things up. So you've heard I spent a little bit of time in the space of chemical application. In fact, that was the start of my life. Brought up in a family where the smell of chemicals was really normal, day-to-day stuff. Getting the washing in off the clothesline with the smell that to me was normal, often 2,4-D or Tordon. Lawsban was a common one. People used to say, what's that perfume? And it's not perfume. I didn't know anything else. It was just normal to me. I started farming when I was 11 years old on a local dairy farm, and it really, really took me. It just, as an 11-year-old, I was milking cows. I just absolutely loved what I did. I was learning. I got to ride motorbikes and drive tractors, and it was just the greatest time of my life. When I went to high school and started high school in town, as you heard, I was brought up in North Otago, Duntroon specifically, a little town just at the start of the Waitaki Valley. And when I went to school in town in Oamaru, at high school, I sort of all of a sudden went from a community of farmers where it was normal to talk about things like, land growth rates and the weather and the rugby, to going to town where not so many people were talking like that. And in fact, I was a bit weird and different for talking like that. And all of a sudden I didn't belong, and all these things started coming up, and I just wanted to get out of there, and I did at the age of 15. I thought, well, actually, I was asked by the principal because as a result of my lacking interest in being there, I misbehaved a little bit. So I was out of there. at 15 and started farming, and again, just into exactly what I wanted to be doing. I just loved farming, and got really good at it really quick. Started to do, as part of my exemption to leave school at 15, I had to take on some extracurricular activity, which at the time was Ag ITO. I think it's now primary ITO, where you learn and gain national certificates while working on farm. And so I did that, and got really good at knowing how to get milk out of the cows. And that was all I was after. I was after just getting milk out of the cows. I wasn't so much interested in the cost, because that's not what I was responsible for. Just kilograms of milk solids, and that was it. And I got really, really good at that. It wasn't until it came to the point of taking the step from management to self-employment in the form of contract milking, where I started to realise, man, what I was doing, the costs associated with that style of management of maximum outputs with associated inputs, which at the time I thought was the only way, I soon realised that, man, there was actually a massive cost involved in taking these steps, trying to get the most production out of it. But it was all I knew, and at the time, it wasn't that I knew there was any other options. It just, at that time, it hit me as, this isn't something I really want to be taking on financially, because I was actually better off financially to stay on wages and carry on with my, all care, no responsibility attitude. I was at that time, I actually, just before that, I had a car accident. I had a 100km/h head-on collision with a Ravensdown fruit salesman, which strikes me as quite ironic. And I broke my femur and smashed my kneecap into several pieces, and that had me held up for some time. And being the workaholic that I say was, but there's still a lot of it sitting there with me, I didn't want to sit still, but farming went on hold for sort of 3 months. But in that time, because I didn't want to sit still, I thought I'd go and take on the family legacy and learn how to drive a spray truck. And so I did that. And with a big moon boot on my left leg, I still could use a clutch. So I learned how to drive a spray truck, so I thought I'd make my old man proud and make my grandfather proud. He was dying at the time. And so at that time, I had one child and was married. I moved up here to Leaston to manage an outfit called Ellesmere Helicopters and Chemical Applicators. The money was really good. It was something that, the dairy thing, I sort of felt I had won that, done best, to my... I was, actually really good at that on paper, so I thought, well, I've done that, what next? I was always really keen to learn. I'll give this chemical thing a go, and so became the local chemical expert. If any of you recognise me as that person, if I'd given you advice or recommendations or anything, quite a lot's changed since we last saw each other. So I did that for 3.5, 4 years. I was responsible for recommendations for growing a lot of seed crops in the Canterbury region, responsible for growing a lot of hybrid specialty seed crops, spraying a lot of pasture, coming up with the tools and techniques to keep diversity controlled, weeds controlled, keep things monoculture, and that was my context. That was what I viewed as the goal. We don't want any competition, and that viewpoint of farming rippled out into my relationships with people. I had to control and had to keep sharing at a minimum, keep that support network. I had to do things on my own, and it's really profound. You hear, I love that quote. Was that your quote, Sam? Was the way you operate is a reflection of the way when you change things, it becomes a change in yourself. Well, I'm living proof of that. I literally, when I went from farming chemically and doing the agronomy thing to really profoundly starting to a job where I managed a local organic mixed cropping sheep and beef farm just in Leaston, that challenged my paradigm. Sam talked about paradigms. My paradigm of growing one thing and controlling the rest with chemicals and supplying that plant with exactly what it needs with fertilizers was my paradigm. And when I took on this job of growing things without my toolkit then was chemicals and fertilizers, I was sort of left with, well, how else do you do it? And I had no choice but to learn. I took the job because after all those years of conventional farming and controlling nature and watching lower response rates, watching more, more resistance or more, you know, less results from the techniques that I'd used for so long. I subconsciously, you know, was seeing these things, but I wasn't acknowledging it. You know, my local river, the Marifenua in Duntroon, went from being my swimming hole as a child to first not swimmable for dogs, and then secondly not swimmable for animals, and then actually profoundly became actually dry several times. And so I wasn't aware of what I was doing was having any impact like that out there. And when I got asked to manage this farm, I sort of thought this guy, his name was Tim Chamberlain, some of you may know him, he asked me to manage his 200 hectare mixed crop and sheep and beef farm that had been organic for 36 years. I thought this guy was a bit bonkers because I was the local chemical dude. Like seriously. And I had no experience of organics. In fact, there was sort of something within our family, you know, like greenies or weirdos, or you should have seen my father's face when I first told him I was going to go manage an organic farm. He was just like, man, here we go. Flax jammers and smoking cannabis and no time. Yeah, little do you know, I used to smoke a lot of that stuff anyway. And so took the job, and man, it rattled me, like it really rattled me. And I went from thinking I had to do everything for plants and control all the weeds, you know, coming up, thinking that, you know, any plants going to seed was going to add to my weed burden. If I didn't control them, I was an irresponsible farmer. Not spraying my fence lines or mowing my, you know, my trash that I was leaving behind with the animals was, you know, I felt like that was poor farming. And I'm going to touch on some basic principles today that hopefully, you know, complement what Cornelia and Sam had to say today, and I'm committed that you guys leave with not only a bit of inspiration as to, you know, possibly there is a whole lot more out there, but also some practical ways in which you can, you know, see how things are for yourself, and perhaps ways that you can move forward as well. So yeah, the way I used to view, how do we line here? This is sort of how I roll. How do we line? It's going to be the soil. We're working in 2D today. Okay, so I'm going to ask a question. When you guys have a poor performing paddock, what's the first thing you do? So I want to be brave and put their hand up and speak with me. Get rid of it. Yeah. Yeah, don't you wish you could do that with your low performing staff? You can't do it. What else? What do we do? We kill it, okay? Fert, yeah. Yep, you just go straight to the fert. I'm having really interesting conversations with my girlfriend at the moment. We're doing our first veggie patch this year. She said, you know, when we were kids, we used to we'd put spuds in, scoop a super. We're doing things a bit differently this year. Yeah, so fertiliser. Why is it that we want to put fertiliser on? To make it grow. How do we know what plants need? Yep. What is it that tells us those desired ranges on soil tests for the plants that we grow? How do we get that information?
Things that are growing there already.
Yep, but what is it that, how do we know what plants need?
Fertiliser company tells you.
Yeah, yep. And aside from that, which is a great, you know, they've got an agenda for sure, but even for the guys that perhaps are on the ground farming, they don't have a product to sell. What do we look for, or who do we look to, or where is it that we get our information that says that those plants need? You know, we'll look at the past for a second here. N, P, K, and S. That was, you know, the big four. What? You do a soil test, yeah. And so we've got information that tells us exactly what plants need and when they need it, right? And we are really good at, you know, getting the timing right and applying these things and giving those plants exactly what they need. Has anyone ever done that and found that you haven't got the results that you'd hoped for? Yeah. Or even better, you've done your soil test. Outside of what the plant needs, you understand sort of roughly where, and we get pretty graphs to tell us exactly where our desired ranges should be, and we get our soils to that point, and we've got our pH balanced, and you know our Olsen P is really high. Who looks at Olsen P? Yeah, really important test. We'll talk about the validity of that too shortly. But we do that, and then has anyone ever seen that they've got their soils to a point where things should be really cranking, but they're just not? Has anyone ever experienced that? Probably a better question, has anyone ever reached that point of being done, you know? Getting their soils to that point where you're not needing to put any more fert on? No. It's a bit like spraying thistles. Has anyone ever won that game? Of course, I've got to be careful with my language. I used to make money off spraying gorse. I was here every year, twice a year. Yeah, you don't get rid of that stuff. We're going to talk a bit more about what causes a plant to grow. Actually, let's talk about it now. Why do weeds grow? Why do weeds grow? You heard Cornelia talk about it. We're going to see how well you were listening.
Bare soil.
Bare soil, yep, that's what I call the opportunity. There's two things that I'm interested in when it comes to plants growing and why they grow. Is it's opportunity and requirement. What is a requirement when we see weeds grow?
The balance is wrong somewhere underneath.
Yeah, and what sort of balance? Bacteria to fungal ratios, yeah. You guys seen when Cornelius point out that the bacteria get dominant, what is it that grows? Weeds, yeah, certain weeds.
But what is a weed?
What is a weed? That's a great question.
A plant out of place.
Let's get that one nailed. What's a weed?
A plant out of place.
I was told I was a weed.
But is it out of place? Because surely it's growing because that's exactly what soil needs.
Yeah, yeah.
The plant is doing.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, what is a weed? It's a bit like the context pasture quality. It's something that we've made up. Okay, it's something that we don't see a place for. It was like me at school. Seriously, it's just a concept. It's something that we've made up. It's not the truth. And the truth is something like, it's something that's continuously evolving all the time. You know, like Sam mentioned about the scientific data that's, doing its best to catch up, and, hats off to them. They've got a big job ahead of them. But science is an innovation. Data is not truth. There was a time that we couldn't fly, and that was scientifically proven. And there was a time that it was scientifically proven that DDT was safe. And so was smoking. I remember seeing ads, well, not my time, I'm 31 years old, but of people smoking when they're pregnant, and it was like, yeah, for smoking. Science and data isn't always the truth. So plants growing in any situation is just a result of the environment. So an imbalance, either microbial or mineral imbalance. Okay? So what is it? Let's look at the bacterial side of things. So what is it that makes an environment bacterial? What is it that makes an environment bacterial?
Acidic soil?
Acidic soil. Fungi don't like acidic soils. Yep. Down the back.
Lack of oxygen.
Yeah, man, for sure. Let's talk about that. So everyone thus far has talked a lot about biology. Let's talk about the habitat for the biology, because it's the habitat that's out of balance that's causing a lot of the problems that we're dealing with right now. And a lot of the inefficiencies, and a lot of the droughts, a lot of the weather extremes. We're going from drought to flood to drought to flood. Things are getting increasingly more expensive to farm, and next minute the answer's in the form of riparian strips and fencing waterways. Sorry about my humour, guys. It's my attempted humour. Yeah. So oxygen, really, really important. How is it that we get to that point of oxygen not being able to enter our soil?
Compaction.
Yeah, so how do we get compaction? Overstocking, that's a word that I avoid, that one. Overgrazing, yeah. Let's get really specific. If this is our soil, and we're talking about overgrazing, what is it that causes that lack of gas exchange? The gas exchange being oxygen and CO2.
Space is too small.
Recycling, that isn't it? The sunlight, the plant growth, the root depth.
For the sake of time, I'm just going to say it's hooves on ground. Really, really simple. Hooves on ground. And it's not so much heavy hooves. And notice I didn't say hooves on pasture. I said hooves on ground, hooves on soil. That's what causes a lot of our compaction. Okay, so it's not that. So if we've got all these plants here, I should give that foot a body. I won't. Because here's our ryegrass systems. Let's do the other. This is the most diversity that I was ever used to. I'd hit the ground with just enough Roundup and just enough Star Rain so that the clovers would survive. And then, how is it that we view the performance of our pastures? I'm going to just say to you, utilisation, right? We're all keen to utilise our pastures. So what's a good utilisation percentage? Well, let's go the other way. What's a good residual in the context of pushing quality? We talk about, untidy farming and leaving behind trash. So what is it that we're chasing here? We're chasing quality. How do we get quality? By... Well, no, we like to, back in the old ways that I used to farm, is we want to get this utilisation, so we want to get the covers right down. And so I'm utilising all of that pasture and chasing quality. And I'll tell you what, if I couldn't do it with my animals, I'd do it with a mower. That then allows for the hooves to get down onto the soil. There's no protection. Okay? How is it that we get protection on the soil to prevent that compaction?
Have more growth before the animals actually go through it.
Okay.
We'll leave more residual.
Leave more residual, that's certainly part of the equation for sure. Let's look at how plants behave when they're grazed. So you guys heard what a plant's role is in the ecosystem. That's actually, because that was something that really shifted for me. What is a plant doing? Is a plant growing up for us to eat or for our animals to eat? Is that what a plant's there to do? Sorry?
It keeps self-growing, cuts the lawn, let it grow long, cuts the lawn, it grows up again.
Yeah, it's a great thing. That's the way I used to view my farm, is just what's up, what's growing up.
Part of the cycle.
Part of a cycle, yep. We talked about photosynthesis. What's happening during photosynthesis? So, louder people?
Plants are trying to store carbon.
Yeah, so it's not just using that photosynthesis to grow upwards, right? Although that's a percentage of it, a lot of it's going down, yep. And as a rule of thumb, a healthy plant will be putting 60% of its sugars up to grow the leaf upwards and not to grow it for you to eat, although that's really important. Why would a plant be growing upwards? More sunlight. Bigger solar panels, more sunlight capture. We can actually measure that. Who's used a refractometer before? Excuse my daughter's hair tie. Refractometer. Yep. Really handy little tool. This tells you how well you're farming. Literally. The higher the reading on this refractometer, the more money in your bank. Okay? It tells you how much sugar you've got in your sap of your plant, how well your plants are photosynthesizing. So a healthy plant, 60% upwards, 40% downwards. What do you think an unhealthy plant looks like with regards to that ratio? Where are the sugars going to be going for an unhealthy plant? Watch I don't draw on this thing. Where would they be going? Would they be growing upwards, do you think? What about when a plant's just coming up out of the ground? Where are most of the sugars going? To the roots. Why? Why are they going out through the roots? Yep, to establish that symbiotic relationship with the soil. Remember, everything in the soil is a currency. A bit like us in life, there is nothing for free. Okay, you can't take all the time, you have to give a bit to receive. It's the same in the soil. So when a plant's really young, you've got a seed, it's just starting to grow, it's putting 90% of its sugars downwards. Okay? Who's ever seen a crop that, and this is not many people have done this, but you've put a crop in the ground and it's just coming up out of the ground, you're thinking, man, this thing's slow. Most of the time we can't put up with that, we just go out and hit it with a bit of urea or a bit of super and just to give it that kick. But who's ever actually waited and then all of a sudden, bang, it just takes off? What do you think's been happening up until that point? Yeah? Yeah. The sugars have not been used to grow up, have they? They've been used to... Who's ever grown cereals before and got really curious before the 2-leaf stage and dug down? Cereals are really amazing little plants when they're just getting up out of the ground like that. They'll have root systems on them twice that of what's above ground. They're getting set up below ground before they engage too much energy to grow up. All of a sudden they've used up a lot of energy, they haven't got the reserves in the soil. There's ways that we can do that. That's by putting everything on the soil surface that the plant needs. Okay, those of you that weren't able to wait, we put what we think the plant needs on, bang, the plant grows up, but it hasn't gone down, and we get a nor'west, everything goes to seed, we've lost it. Okay? Now, with regards to grazing. So we've got to the point now, we've got 60 up, we've got 40 down. We've established a symbiotic relationship with the biology in the soil. And remember, Cornelia said, every plant, well, actually I'm going to word it a bit differently, every plant has its own unique form of those carbohydrates or carbon chains, as Cornelius referred to them as. Okay, so every plant has its own unique form. There's over 10,000 scientifically discovered and unique forms of carbohydrate. Okay, why is that important? We just think carbohydrates, carbon entering the soil, it's fantastic stuff, but why we want the different forms of that carbohydrate? And Cornelius did talk about this.
To feed different
Yeah,
organisms.
yeah, it's a bit like when you go to a Chinese takeaway shop, right? There's certain people at the Chinese takeaway shop. Okay, you go to a Burger King, certain people. You go to a food court of a mall, lots of different people. Now the soil biology is the same as us as human beings. The more diversity we have, and I look out in this room, we've got a lot of diversity. We're all good at different things. We're all, some of us are good at some things, others are good at other things. If we work alone, we're just subject to that and that's it. But if we all work together, we get these outcomes that are greater than that which if we were all to be doing our own thing. And I learned that the hard way through 27 years of trying to do it all on my own. Yeah. So more plants, more different forms of carbohydrates entering the soil surface. And it's in fact that form of carbohydrate entering the soil, or what I call the liquid carbon pathway, that's 5 times faster than building your soil than decomposition alone or detritus alone. Has anyone ever heard of that? Building soil with liquid carbon. And Sam talked about 0.5% every year consistently. Well, I've seen double that. 0.5% in 6 months. Plant diversity, grazing management, we can build soil so fast. Every 1% of soil organic matter increase in your soil is another 180,000 litres of water holding capacity per hectare. The carbon sponge, nature's detoxifier, increasing your cation exchange capacity, increasing your nutrient capacity. The payment for all the services in the soil is that carbon. Okay? Let's talk about the grazing. We've got our plants here. Cornelia also mentioned just once, and I'll just thrash it out a little bit, mycorrhizal fungi. Who's actually heard of that crazy word? A lot of people haven't. Mycorrhizal fungi. Myco meaning fungus, rhizal meaning root. These are the funguses that form symbiotic relationships with 90% of the plants on the planet. When I say symbiotic relationships, these fungi are the smallest yet largest living organisms on the planet. They grow one cell at a time looking for partners to form a relationship with. So different plants to come along and connect with. Okay? Extending the root mass of those plants upwards of 1,000% the original size of the root mass. Does that sound significant? Does it sound a bit dramatic? A little bit. These fungal networks, or fungal hyphae, or technically known as mycelium, grow outwards, downwards, three-dimensionally for kilometres, connecting with other plants. They are the internet of the soil. Okay? Growing your larger soil aggregates that increase porosity, producing sticky carbon substances like glomalin, which hold on to soil aggregates and prevent erosion. Okay? Building your soil faster than you know what to do with. These guys are also the communication network. So when we talked about diversity, and let's look at it in a human being context, if we all have great skill sets and don't talk, can we use that diversity together? No. Well, this is how plants communicate. The mycelium. Okay? So what it looks like is, here's a plant. Let's say it's going to produce a seed head. What's a nutrient that's vital for seed production or fruit fill? Any agronomists out there? No? Potassium is really important for filling out seeds and fruit. This plant's got a demand for potassium. Out into the root system goes a request for potassium. This request is an electromagnetic signal. It goes into the web, into the fungal network, along with a payment. Remember, everything in the soil being a currency. What's the payment? Carbon, carbohydrates. Out into the network it goes. Bit of carbon, all right. It'll go to the nearest microbial community that can make that potassium available, or it'll go to a plant that can make that potassium available. Okay? Drop off the carbon, here you go, that's payment. I'll have that potassium straight back into the root of that plant in a plant available form. These are forms of nutrients that we can't even consider replicating. When we look at a plant and we think, oh, it needs phosphorus, and we make phosphorus and give it to it. It's not a whole and complete form that the plant's used to. Okay? So the fungal network is massively vast. If you were to go up into the hill here, where there's all these trees, every footstep you take on that ground out there, you're standing on over 3,000 miles of fungus with every footstep. And it's telling those trees you're coming. Okay? Telling plants in the vicinity to prepare. When an animal comes along and has a nibble, who's noticed when you put animals into a paddock, you've got a nice big cover, 3.5 tonne, do they eat that plant to the ground straight away? What do? Where's the best stuff on a plant? Top, yeah. For sure. Okay, so along comes Daisy, nibble. Now the first thing this plant does is it quickly flicks on its natural defence mechanism. Okay? Its natural defence mechanism is to take whatever sugars are remaining in the leaf, and drop them out through into the roots to attract biology and the return for nutrients and for its recovery. Okay, and that's a seamless action. It's a bit like that. It's a bit, some ornamental plants you trim and you watch the leaves relax. That's that plant letting go of those sugars. The trapdoor opens. That trapdoor is powered by boron. Boron's an essential nutrient for putting those sugars up into the leaf, but also letting them go down into the root zone. There's ways you can use things like that refractometer to test for boron deficiencies in your plants. If you test your plants in the morning and they're say 8 on the refractometer, test them again in the afternoon, they're 9, or even worse, 8, it hasn't moved, you've got a boron deficiency in that plant. Just a little trick for you. Alright, so the plant's been eaten, that's gone. What's remaining is, there's still a bit of green material there. The plant's still photosynthesizing. It's got the nutrients that it needed and why it gave that carbon up to receive. It's cool, it's growing. However, the animals have now gone around the paddock and Daisy's coming back. What is she doing? She's going to have another wee nibble. Only when we make her. Okay, she's come back, she's had another nibble. Do you think that plant has sugars to let go for its natural defence mechanism? No. So what happens now? What happens now? How does the plant get energy? Sorry?
That needs a rest.
It needs rest, yeah, it will get that with rest. But in the short term, it'll mobilise root reserves to generate energy so that it can regrow. It'll also use up soluble nutrients around the existing root zone. Okay? In this time, this plant is not feeding the biology. So guess what? The biology is not feeding it. It's really struggling. But we're not done there. We'll come back and get that utilisation. We'll get that quality. Now what happens? Well, the plant drops off some more roots. As Sam said, what's above ground is a reflection of what's happening below ground. Okay? When we graze that low, those plants stop growing sometimes up to 17 days. This is where our love for synthetic inputs comes in. Because we put our urea on, we put our super on, boom, we get a response. But what we're not aware of is we don't regrow these when we're doing that. Okay? Getting down there, we're now compacting our soils with hooves, and in that part of the plant, that's where all our parasitic larvae and eggs live, as well as the nitrates that live within a plant are down there. There's also not a lot of energy down there. Not great for our animals. Okay, so part of it's leaving higher residuals. There's a bit more to it than that. I'm gonna, how are we doing for time? Okay, I'm just going to do I'm just going to focus on the grazing thing here, because I think it's really relevant for what you guys are dealing with. We've heard a bit about stock density. Why is stock density important? We've heard a bit about it, but we've not really talked about why. Why is stock density important? Why do we want to increase our stocking density? Isn't that going to make things worse?
It tramples the uneaten herbage into the ground, onto the surface of the soil.
Yeah, man. Yep. Density equals trampling onto the soil surface. Why do we want trampling onto the soil surface? Isn't that waste?
Ground cover. Mulch.
Yeah? Yeah, ground cover, mulch. Okay, so what I look at is it's, as a general rule of thumb, we want to graze 30, 40, up to 50% of the plant. That's where all the energy is. Okay? We want to trample about another remaining third onto the soil surface, and we want to leave about a third standing to be able to continue capturing sunlight, but this is just a guide. I want you guys just to use your eyes to tell whether you need to increase your density a bit more. There's some things you can look at. I use colour. Okay, this isn't something for a plate meter. Okay, you need to use your eyes to be able to say, have I got enough green here to continue growing, to continue capturing sunlight? Have I got even stimulation? Who's looked down into their paddocks, as in Cornelia's presentation, where you've got pieces of grass that haven't been touched round after round after round, sometimes years after years? Yep, that's a sign of what?
Not very good eating.
Not good eating, yep. That plant's done its dash. Yep. That's a sign of low density. The density hasn't been high enough, it's overgrazing and understocking. Those two go hand in hand. One of the biggest detrimental practices that we can do, and it's actually global here, is put a small amount of animals on a large area and leave them alone. And you can see from that previous little demonstration why. Okay, so how do we achieve, so with that being said, I mean, what's there to do about that? How do we get rid of those tufts of grass that don't perform for us? Not really how do we get rid of them, but how do we stop that from happening?
Rotational grazing?
Yep, definitely. Who freaked out when I said we're just going to graze 30 to 50% of the plant? Yeah. How do we farm like that? Okay, leaving those tufts of grass, that's a percentage of your pasture sward that's not working for you. So when I talk about leaving about 30, 35% behind, trampling I mean, how do we get that back? How does that animal, how do we keep our stocking rate up with only grazing that well? What we don't consider is we're often too wrapped up in the pushing feed in front, okay? Pushing feed in front. We're not thinking about growing feed in behind. When we're just grazing 30 to 50% and moving, so getting on like in the prairies of America when we form those massive grasslands with topsoils that are deeper than this room, that was formed by mobs of millions of bison moving nomadically, keeping that density. Why? Why were they mobbed around in this big dense fashion?
Predators?
Yeah, to keep themselves safe from predators. It's a byproduct that they grew massive amounts of topsoil. So we're just trying to mimic that. So leaving a bit of grass behind doesn't mean you're going to grow less feed. In fact, what you'll discover is you'll quickly grow more feed. Because the grass grows the minute you leave that break. You're growing feed in behind as opposed to pushing it out in front. You're leaving that trample layer. You're stimulating 100% of your pasture sward. We're not leaving those tufts of grass behind that aren't going to serve us. Quickly you'll find you'll have to buy more animals or defer paddocks to stay on top of the growth that you have. Your rotation speed must reflect your growth rate. And that's what there is to be responsible for. Density is a great tool for doing just this, but there's more to it than that. What other benefits are there to high stock density and frequency of shift? What other benefits would there be?
Diversity of plants.
That will come as a result of the shifting of the soil environment. Okay? Remember that soil environment is what is responsible for what plant species grow. So as you start to, as you stop compacting your soil, the fungal components start to balance out. You start to get that support from that mycelium. Weeds that were growing for years and years and years and years stop growing. The requirement's being taken care of. The opportunity for them to grow has gone. What was the opportunity? No, that was the requirement. What was the opportunity?
The plant isn't growing fast enough to compete now.
Bare ground. We've not got bare ground when we're trampling. Okay? So when I look out and we've got low density and we're grazing like this, we're grazing some pieces to the ground and we're leaving this piece to go to seed, all we're doing is we're taking, this is the way I look at it, is it really worked for me from being this analytical, quality chasing dairy farmer that I was, is we're just taking the tops of these, which was feed, valid food, and spreading it out across the low-lying area. So what we end up with is a nice even sward, 100% stimulation. We keep the plants in a vegetative state, so they continuously grow. We don't lose our root mass, so we're resilient to drought. And the other thing that we didn't talk about before is not only do we, when we eat the plants down that low, not only do we remove our root mass, but what do you think the mycorrhizal fungi were going to do when we do that?
Die off.
Yeah, well, just like the staff that you don't pay, they don't hang around for long. Yeah, yep. So they disappear. So they've gone. They're not mycorrhizal fungi. Any fungi, all natures are extremely resilient. They will come back, but we just give it, a really hard time in doing so. Just before we finish up, mycorrhizal fungi. What are some things that might, so we talked about overgrazing, they're going to disappear, we're not going to get the support from them. What else do you think is going to hurt those little guys? Remember, they're the smallest living organism on the planet, but the largest. What else is going to hurt those guys? Yep.
Synthetic fertilizers?
Synthetic fertilizers. So there's one synthetic fertilizer that will just neutralize them, like just nail them, like a blowtorch to here, and that's superphosphate. It grows grass, but yeah, it is really hard on mycorrhizal fungi. That's the only one that I'm going to pick on. I'm not going to say urea or any of these other nutrients because that's indirect, and we'll talk a bit about indirect soon, but let's just nail the direct. Direct superphosphate, sure, bang, neutralised, gone. What else?
Trenches.
Trenches, sure, some. They're going to make it really hard to grow, but again, it's sort of more indirect. Fungi are actually really resilient little creatures when it comes to some toxins. Fungicides, they're gone. Yep. What else? Little tiny organisms. Has anyone ever got under a cultivator while it's going? You guys are awake? Yeah, no, I haven't either. But yeah, cultivation just cuts them up into little pieces, so they don't like that. They don't do very well. Indirect. Now, what do I mean by indirect? It's a bit like us saying glyphosate's safe to drink. Sure, you won't die, but your biology and your gut will that supports you for your health and resilience, so it's an indirect effect. Okay? What's indirectly affecting our mycorrhizal fungi and the other biology that rely on that plant for its food source? Indirect. Herbicides, some insecticides for sure, indirectly affect those guys. What about fertiliser in general? Even biologically friendly fertiliser, how is that going to indirectly get rid of our mycorrhizal fungi? Has anyone ever been offered to receive money every day for the rest of their lives and 3 meals a day just dropped on your front doorstep? I don't imagine so, you wouldn't be down here. Those guys don't tend to go out and change the world, okay? But like the plants that you give everything that they need, right there on the root surface, what are the roots going to do? Do you think they're going to go looking for nutrients? No. No. So if they're not looking for nutrients, they're not signalling for support from the surfaces of the soil. So if they're not signalling or requesting for those services, what else are they not doing? They're not paying for them, are they? Okay? That mycorrhizal fungi and other associated organisms in the soil are reliant on these plants photosynthesizing. If these plants are getting everything they need from the soil surface, they're not going to then give up their carbon. They won't have to. Okay, so indirectly, doing everything for our plants makes them shed their relationship with the biology of the soil. The very thing that's making them resilient, giving them the nutrients they need in a whole and complete form, moving nutrients throughout the soil. This world that we've got ourselves caught up in with variable rate fertiliser applications and precision GPS, there's nothing precision about nature. Everything moves. It's static. Everything's flowing all the time. There's no straight lines. My obsession with spraying fence lines and mowing pastures down flat didn't get me any more money. Like Sam said, this is a paradigm shift. Who's challenged by what they've learnt today? Yeah, and that's good. There's nothing wrong here. The way I used to farm, man, I wouldn't have listened to any of this. The only reason I did was because I had to for my job, and secondly, when my wife and children moved away 200 kilometres, I had to really think about what it was that I was doing with my life. That was 3 years ago. I thought to myself, I'm going to do something more with my life. No longer was I interested in the farm with the family because I didn't have the family. I thought to myself, right, what am I going to do to show to my two children that you can do anything you want with your life, and when you're passionate about what you do, and when you find purpose in your life, and then you go after that, there's a lot of discomfort involved. Trust me. So being okay with that. And we don't know it all. Coming into election, if someone would just say to me, look, we don't actually know all there is to know, but we're committed to learning, man, I would vote for that person. Okay? That allows for discovery, that allows for innovation, that allows for growth. Thinking we know it all is comfortable, yes, but does it allow for growth? No. And right now we need growth. We need innovators. We need people sharing. We need people discovering. I'll stop there. Hopefully you've learned something.
How do we do this on Beach Peninsula? How do we have higher density of stock with such cost efficiency and hill country?
Sure. So one thing that people don't often see is a choice is being responsible for what you're actually spending your money on currently. What is it that we're spending our money on? What is it that's taking up our resources? Just restructuring that to suit, because I'm not standing here saying fertilisers are bad and wrong, stop using them, you'll go broke really, really quick. Okay? We spend a lot of money on doing the work that nature can do for us. And when we start allowing those functions and cycles to do the work for us that we're currently spending money on doing or getting, then it frees up some funds. It frees up some funds to spend on things like fencing, like water. And it's not about dropping things out. Things like nitrogen applications and trying to maintain phosphorus levels in your soil, it's not that we don't have to pull those away. Things like with our nitrogen, putting a bit of carbon with it, 1 to 3% carbon with your urea, you can drop your rates 30% straight away without any effects. The plant, with having that balanced carbon to nitrogen ratio, is able to take all of that nitrogen rather than the excess nitrogen volatilizing into the atmosphere and into the waterways or into the aquifers. There's lots of little things you can do. It's not about reinventing the wheel, and it's not about throwing away everything you've always done. And we've got to get a bit creative. I've got a guy they've got 9,000 hectares down near Wanaka. And this year we're going to play with, because what's the problem down there with merinos is, do you think merinos are going to enjoy this mob grazing? They're such great mothers already. No, they don't like it. So what happens over there when they've got paddocks, over 1,000 hectares, is the animals tend to go for the highest points of the paddock. And so the low points of the paddock don't get touched. And what happens when the low points of the paddock don't get grazed or stimulated? Another point that I didn't make before with regards to density is that kinetic stimulation is so important. It's not just keeping the plant vegetative, but that kinetic stimulation actually wakes the biology up into overdrive. So we're looking at spreading on a bit of kelp and a bit of molasses to tempt them down, as well as the brave farmer's son has put his hand up to say he'd like to herd them. You'd like to get a team of guys out there with their tents and their backpacks and just have these animals like what they do in the African savannas and just mob these merinos up, just see what that does. And I don't have all the answers, but what's important for me, and I'm sure all these guys are the same, is that you guys understand the functions underneath these principles, underneath these practices, so that you understand what we're trying to achieve, and just the way that we carry it out is going to be up to you to decide or discover. There's lots of ways to skin the cat. Children do skin cats.
More questions?
Yeah, so I've got a quick question for you. Have you got case studies available that's on our website or something that you can share and we can read up about, especially like as you're saying, like not just from one specific area but from all over the country?
With regards to what specifically?
Oh, just basically just different techniques with regenerative farming.
Yeah, sure. That's something that Sam and I and the rest of the team at Quorum Sensing are actually committed to bringing forth in sort of a library form that you guys can access, because right now there's a lot of that information out there that is, validated and often peer reviewed. Not that that makes them the truth, but they are there, and what's missing is just the access to them. So outside of just my own case studies that I've done, which get in contact with me after this if you'd like to learn some of the stuff that I've done. I'm not a scientist, but the things that I've observed are used by using methods, just simple methods that we use every day, like basic soil testing and visual observations, and using different visual soil assessment techniques to show and benchmark our trends, which are really, really impressive. Come and see us about joining the group and getting amongst the farmers doing the stuff, and you can hear it from the horse's mouth.
Yeah, because like at the moment we've just got, if you go to the quorumsense.org.nz website, there's like just a link to a Google Doc that's got a whole lot of resources and videos and a few links to social media pages of farmers in New Zealand that are kind of effectively case studies. And a big part of what we're going to be focused on in the next 12 months to 2.5 years is just collecting those case studies from around the country and making them more accessible. And so there'll be video format, written graphs, all that kind of stuff, and we'll be building that over time. So we just hired a guy that's basically a visual storyteller to go and cruise around the country doing that. He's pretty pumped about his job. There's a bit on there now. Lots of it's on social media. There are a couple of websites around, but from our perspective, that's hopefully coming soon.
We've got a podcast coming out by the end of this month. It'll be starting really frequently, like fortnightly, talking about what we've discovered and touching on various case studies and progress.
What are you calling your podcast so we can look it up?
This one at this stage is going to be the Quorum Sense podcast.
If you go to, if I can make my official plug, at the moment, like Quorum Sense kind of operates on a WhatsApp chat which is limited, and then we've just got a Facebook group which lots of people don't like using Facebook, which is fair enough. There's about 3,000 people on there at the moment, so it's a bit overwhelming for some. And we've kicked off a newsletter on the website, and so if it's we're kind of like, we just hired more people than me as far as like doing the actual work only about 3 weeks ago, so we're kind of just getting sorted. But if you sign up to the newsletter, which you can get through the website, which is just quorumsense.org.nz, that's where the podcast will come through there, any case studies will come through there. That'll be and once we hopefully kind of develop more opportunities to connect with other farmers that aren't just WhatsApp or Facebook, which is part of our plan, is because that's not for everybody. That's kind of the safe place where if you're on that newsletter, you'll kind of find out about those opportunities. So that would be my
I've got a sheet on the back there with a table with all the books. There's some resources on it. There's also the John Kemp, the Regenerative podcast. So just take a photo of that and go through. It's very briefly, but some of the people you can follow, you find YouTube videos, and there's case studies on there too. So have
It's
a
worth
look.
having a look at those books.
Yeah.
Back here.
And there's heaps. Once you start digging and you find those people that you get knowledge from, then you find more and you go from one to the next.
Just before we carry on, can I also just a bit of a so my views today are just that of my own. Sam's here representing Quorum Sense. Yes, I'm involved with Quorum Sense, but I'm not here today representing Quorum Sense. I just wanted to communicate that and make that clear.
Shireen?
Yeah, thanks very much, you guys. I mean, this is an amazing, exploration of new ideas. And for me, it actually started with asking the question, why do we need the fart tax? And that led to all sorts of things, finding out, grass can sequester carbon faster than trees, but then when it dies down, of course, releases carbon, or, it can go back into the ground, nutrients and so on. But then I started to understand more about the whole cycle. I mean, why have we got ruminants? They evolved 90 million years ago. Okay, they're part of the cycle. And it sort of grew and grew and grew until one scientist I actually emailed at one stage said, oh yes, but we've got methane, and methane is so bad. And so back to Google, and discovered these amazing little microorganisms called methanotrophs. And so our methane's not just controlled in the atmosphere, but it's controlled in the ground as well. And so rather than do things to animals' guts to make them produce less methane, we're actually best to look at this type of farming, which actually is part of the whole natural system. So no need for fat tax.
Well, look, what is excess methane production a symptom of? Do you understand what?
Yeah, because it says the lack of the health of the soil, because methanotrophs can be poison just like everything else.
Yeah, I'll just offer my perspective on it through my learning. So, for any microbial digestion, you need a carbon to nitrogen ratio of between 23 and 25 to 1. I look at carbon and nitrogen as carbon being the brown roughage material you find in nature, and nitrogen being the green luscious material. And so when we're feeding all green, especially with low diversity, as Cornelia said, with regards to the gut biome is very similar to that of the soil biome. The diversity of food entering the gut is going to be a reflection of the microbial diversity. There's two conversations going on here, but they're happening simultaneously. One is our animals are always eating green feed, high nitrogen, or protein as it's traditionally viewed as. Anything more than 17 or 18% protein for instance, dairy cattle, they have to convert that excess protein to ammonium with excess energy, which expels in the form of urine nitrates or milk-ureas. But also, as a result of the lacking gut function through the low plant diversity entering the rumen, the animals are not only chasing carbon, they're eating the volumes that they're eating to try and satisfy their carbon balance, and so the excess nutrients are being expelled out the other end, like Sam said, like the eye of the needle. But also the microbial diversity, which is required for converting that biomass into nutrients and secondary metabolites and other energy, is lacking, and the diversity is low, and the function is low, in the way that we treat our animals with the various health treatments that we offer is actually detrimental to that biome again. And so the efficiency of conversion of that biomass to energy is low, and as a result of that, and as a result of the excessive consumption of that high protein material, we get gas, and lots of it. When we increase our plant diversity offering to our animals, offer them a bit more of that carbon, so that brown material, we don't get so caught up in our quality. The animals literally eat less dry matter. They have more efficiency of conversion from biomass to energy. Not only do they eat less, they fart less. No different to us as we go to certain foods give us gas, or we're just feeding our animals that food all the time.
Like you said, just wanted to firstly thanks for your little segment there, which I really enjoyed. And I thought, I just want to check like what you're saying, kind of like a definition of regenerative agriculture as being essentially monitoring any sort of farm or land management practice to make sure it's moving forward. Would that be accurate, or is that?
So my personal way that I view regenerative farm, like a regenerative farm system versus regenerative agriculture. Regenerative farm system is the outcome we're working towards, and under that label I don't care how or what you do to get there. Like you can use a complete conventional toolbox, manage it really, really well and appropriately, and be improving your whole system. And as far as I'm concerned, it's awesome. And whereas regenerative agriculture being the paradigm, which is more about this kind of living system, soils alive, microbiomes, kind of thing. That's just.
Do you think the understanding of that's well aligned at the moment, or is there a way to go with that?
No, I think there's a huge amount of confusion. That's why I talk about it a little bit, because I think that might be helpful to make the distinction. Because of the science work that I do on a couple of national advisory groups and things like that, who are trying to, everyone's trying to define it and that kind of stuff, and we're saying, well, if you're going to define, they're going to define it, right? And most of us aren't particularly attached to the word regenerative. It's just the one that's kind of stuck and is used. So we're like, well, we'd rather work with it and offer understanding rather than have it confused by not using it.
Potentially biological is a better word perhaps than regenerative as well. They're kind of,
To us, it's just farming. Like we're just
talking about
it's just farming.
we as an organisation, we're like, do we go with the word regenerative or not? And it was at the point in time where it's like, look, this thing's just got its own legs. We're far better off. Farmers will be far better off if we kind of take some ownership of it and try and offer a bit of clarity to it, rather than trying to stay away from it, just use biological. And then they'll be like, well, what does regenerative mean to you? And you constantly have to answer that question because people get hung up on labels for whatever reason, whereas we're more concerned with the understanding and the meaning behind it. So, but at the same time, the high levels, the governments and scientists and all that kind of stuff get all hooked up on the labels too. So we're trying to kind of in there, trying to help gently. And on the methane thing, there's some hypotheses out there, I suppose, that the soil, a healthy functional soil will consume a certain amount of methane, and that healthy pastures, well balanced and that kind of stuff, will produce less than that. But at the moment there's not really any data. The kind of fundamental scientific understandings there, we know methanotrophs exist and we know that the gut will behave differently, but we haven't quantified that. We definitely haven't quantified it in New Zealand, so that's kind of some of the science work I'm involved in, which would be a really useful role for science to come and actually help understand what's going on. When we manage these systems differently, does it change the way that behaves? Therefore, is methane a problem? What's happening with carbon? I mean, nitrous oxide's a no-brainer, right? Nitrous oxides come from excess nitrogen, compaction, and anaerobic conditions, right? So if you've got a healthy soil without excess nitrogen, chances are your nitrous oxide emissions are going to be way lower. But at the moment, we get these, it's one number that gets applied to everyone, and that's just a challenge for. Yeah, I think we'll get there.
So Sam, when you have those sort of indicators, results come through, are you looking 1 year, 3 year, 5 year?
For that to actually change, for that work to happen and be done in different places and replicated enough to eventually flow into policy and effectively some kind of economic system, that's years. You're talking, I'd say it's 5 years away at least. I mean, generally, it's interesting, politics always comes up at the end of these kind of events. And it's we're focus on what you can control, right? And generally speaking, when we're talking about these, from my perspective, we're talking about these kind of systems, if you can get them functional and profitable, then there's all of these positive flow-on effects that just come out of it. It's kind of like there's this real funny climate change poster where there's this big list of all these benefits of addressing climate change, less air pollution, less extractive waste and more biodiversity, all these kind of things, and then someone goes, but what if it's all a hoax? And you're like, oh, who cares? Are we better off or not? That's the outcomes thing. Are we better off or not? So it's kind of like, well, when it comes to that kind of methane thing, it's like, well, what can we control? We can control what's within the boundaries of our farming, and that's going on, and we have very little influence over anything else, and so for me, that's kind of my focus. And on your behalf, I'm trying to do the real niggly science work, I suppose, to try and bring a different conversation at that level.
Talking about that, I think we can sequester a lot more carbon on a healthy, diverse pasture than putting in a monoculture pine plantation. We can pump so much more carbon down with the plants actively pumping into the food web. Yeah, forget the.
I just want to ask if anyone else has any questions along the way, because we'll just finish with Francis.
Thanks for saying that. It's all part of my question. But thanks, Sam, for recognising how Craig's Peninsula is actually fertile. We've got a huge seabird colony on our property. It's fairly rich. And it smells good. But your progression from rock to forest in your first diagram, you get to the pasture stage. On our property, we've gone about 50% into the trees. And that's as far as I want to go. I don't want to go any further because I have a letter from Mr. Shaw saying, well, thanking me for doing that. There's no money in it for me. He prefers pine trees. And that's that. So I've tried all the methods to actually stop it. And some of them are the bad ones you talked about. And I employed the firm that you used to work for to do it, and cut out and other things. But it's interesting, there's some thoughts racing around in my head about how that surplus growth forest can be used to actually as a mulch. But it's going to be difficult in hill country. Because think that one through and how it's done. You all see things rotting down and the fungus it produces rotting down. Yeah. The only good thing about spraying the stuff is it actually stands there and rots down into the soil. And it's actually really quite good stuff underneath it, but it takes time. It blitzes. Everything gets a hell of a hit when you do it. It's not nice, but burning's worse.
Yeah, there's a couple of farmers trying really high density grazing through existing gore stands without burning or spraying to see if it'll shift the conditions away from gorse just naturally just through grazing intensity, which is, and I don't know whether gorse is a fungal dominant, I think gorse is more of a fungal dominant thing, as it said, they talk about sleepy soils, so and so if you can actually get that, I think it's like if you can just crank it as a high productivity pasture and that kind of stuff by getting that grazing intensity, which is not always a very pragmatic option, I admit, but then there's a couple of farmers trying to do that for those reasons, but I haven't got any results or whatever.
I did that with the block balls, that's with old withers. My neighbour, when are you going to ship them? But each one shipped them straight from the seeding pools. So I didn't cost, for the first 3 years I didn't have to spray that. It was only when I got down a few clumpy bits that actually went down around it. But it's not productive on the animals and it's tough on the animals.
What I've found is, I talked about the requirement and the opportunity. If you, so I started a seed company last year called Symbiosis Ag, where we sell and produce custom seed mixes to suit just context like that which you've just mentioned. So areas where you've got, woody weeds, and so what's nature trying to do here? Well, if you dig up that plant, those roots are massive. So you've removed the plant from growing, it grows back every time, right? Well, what we've discovered is we're really successful with mulching and then drilling in straight away a crop that's going to mimic its root tapestry to that of the gorse, and so removing the requirement, and then of course forming the canopy before the gorse gets up and away, therefore removing the opportunity. And man, it makes a hard time for that gorse to come back. And then when you apply that technique that Sam's talking about with the high density grazing, smash that stuff down again, well, that's the gorse done. Like, this is radical new stuff, and it's being applied in New Zealand right now on broad acre scale with choppers and digger mulches. And next year is going to be the year where we're going to come in with some really cool results for you.
That's awesome. So it's a great opportunity to say thank you, Jono, Sam and Cornelia. So thanks everyone for coming. I'll just ask you to a round of applause again. This was put on today by Regenerative Peninsula, and big thanks to Abe, who really put this on, so well done.